All right, indirect talks between Israel and Hamas commenced today in Egypt to hash out details for a ceasefire and hostage release deal based on President Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza. Now, the president told reporters yesterday he expects the negotiations to take a couple of days, and in a post on Truth Social urged negotiators to move fast. But with the two sides, will the two sides be able to close the gaps as quickly as everyone would like? Joining me now to discuss this, Victoria Coates, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump. She's now Vice President of the Heritage Foundation's Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. Victoria, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, Tony. Great to be with you.
All right. The timing of this can't be lost on people because tomorrow is the second anniversary of the October 7th terrorist attack against Israel. We're still talking about hostages being held. Are we closer to seeing an end to this war and these hostages being released?
Well, we certainly are a lot closer than I would have thought 2 weeks ago, and all credit to the President and Secretary Rubio for using the United Nations General Assembly, maybe for the first time for a useful purpose, which was to have a lot of bilateral meetings with Muslim-majority nations in the region to hammer out this 20-point plan. And so while you had postures like Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer recognizing some fictional Palestinian state at UNGA, you had the President and the Secretary actually carrying out diplomacy to try to get to an end to this war. And we all know the reason we have to get there now is the hostages. The President has been a relentless advocate for them, for getting them out, because it's now 2 years tomorrow. Inhumane doesn't even begin to sum it up.
I just want to make this comment, a side comment along the way. You mentioned France. Macron ought to actually think about creating a French state. Their government seems to be collapsing over there.
Yes, I had that thought this morning as well when we saw that the most recent French prime minister didn't last a day in the job. And so, what is he doing trying to create a Palestinian state?
Were they not the first in this latest go-around to call for that Palestinian state and kind of be the first domino to fall there?
Oh, yes. And I mean, they've come to visit me and explain the foolishness of my ways and why they were so wise to do that. And it's going to bring peace. Like, no, this is going to bring the opposite of peace. Thank heavens for President Trump getting in there and saying, here is a deal. The Arabs can agree to it. The Israelis can agree to it. We've never been there before, collectively, for a sort of grand bargain between the two parties. This is new.
Victoria, let me ask you this question. So the Hamas, they're saying, in principle, we agree with this, but we got a few things we need to negotiate about. And one of them is whether or not they leave completely, let go of power, and let go of their weapons. But that's got to be non-negotiable for Israel.
It is non-negotiable. Those are, of course, key points in the president's plan. And he's been very clear. This is the plan. There's very little room for negotiations here. And we know what Hamas is saying behind the scenes, that they're looking for loopholes. They're looking for cracks that they can exploit. The president was explicit yesterday and today. If you do that, if you try to string us along, all hell will break loose. And we're starting to get some idea of what that might look like. It's not pleasant for Hamas or the people of Gaza, but if that's what has to happen, that has to happen. President's giving them another option.
How long can they string the? Because that is, they've done this before. You've seen this. Not the first time that they have kind of said, we agree with this in principle, only to fail to come to the table in totality.
Well, I think the difference this time is President Trump has demonstrated this year that if you try to string him along and do some kind of diplomatic dance, he's going to call you on it. We can ask the Iranians how they feel about going over their deadline and allowing then the Israelis to go in their 12-day war, culminating in the strike of the B-2 bombers by a president everybody thought was desperate for a deal. Guess what? He wasn't. He was desperate to end the Iranian nuclear program that was a direct threat to the United States. So I think he sees Hamas as a direct threat to Israel. Israel is a great and good partner of the United States. If he can get this resolved diplomatically, he would prefer to, but he's going to get it resolved.
Victoria, you're not new to this. You've been working on this issue of Israel, Hamas, Palestinians, the PA, Palestinian Authority, all of that. And are there any aspects of the 20-point plan that you're concerned about?
Well, anything that's dependent on Hamas is a concern that they're going to be a rational, normal, good faith actor. So you always have to watch all of that closely. But what's okay about it, Tony, is it is conditional. Israel stays in Gaza. The Israeli forces stay in Gaza until certain conditions are met, and Israel has to certify those. So there's no imminent departure of Israel on some Hamas timetable. The other thing is this is the first deal that is not predicated on the formation of a Palestinian state. That aspiration is left open, and I believe point 19 out of 20, but that's an aspiration for the Palestinian people living in Gaza, and they may or may not get to the conditions required to get to some kind of self-determination. We'll see. But that's not the predicate for this deal. So that's where I think this is acceptable if the hostages come out, if the Israeli Defense Forces can stay in Gaza for the foreseeable future. This is acceptable.
Victoria, just have about a minute left. In this plan, it does, and one of the points, I think it's might be point 16, that Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. So that really solidifies the 2005 withdrawal. Any concerns about that?
Well, we'll see. Again, I mean, I don't know how desirable that is for Israel if we are trying to use this deal to get to broader normalization in the region. I would see that as more important if the other conditions are met, if Hamas disarms, if they sue for amnesty or leave the Strip. If all of that takes place, and we can get to, say, the Israel-Saudi deal that we would all love to see happen. If this is the sort of what paves the way to that, I can live with that. But again, we're going to have to see what Hamas does.
All right, Victoria Coates, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony.